Hello everyone, this is our first show on Boulder City Voices. I am super excited to have Councilman Warren Harhay with me. I'm looking forward for our interview. I really wanted to get to know Councilman Harhay and also talk to him a little bit about some Boulder City issues. So thanks so much for being on.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wanted to start, just get to know you a little bit better. Where are you from?
Originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and born in the middle of World War II in Cleveland, Ohio, 1943. So I'm a geezer.
So where did you go to school? What's your background as far as education?
Well, I have a checkered history of education. I have a my undergraduate work was actually started at Kent State University in Kent, and then I transferred to Cleveland State University, which is it's an interesting school. It was it's called Fenn College. That's the original name of the school. And Fenn College was sponsored by the YMCA, and what was unique about Fenn College is what a work study, where all of the students in the discipline that they elected would go to school during the day, and many would go to school at night or go to work at night, or vice versa. In my case, I finished up working full-time during the day and going to school at night. So that work-study program, I was able to cram 4 years of education into 7 years. I did additional work at Kent State University, and then I have a PhD in electrical engineering from Wellington National, which
so what work were you doing during those years?
Well, when I left college, I was offered a job to open a laboratory in Parma, Ohio, to teach high school boys electronics and mathematics. So my first 7 years of work experience was as a high school teacher. I taught mathematics and electronics, and it was a very enjoyable period of time for me, but it actually turned into my first business venture. One of the field trips that we had taken with the boys was to a company in Cleveland, Ohio that made electric lift trucks, industrial trucks, and there was the Baker Roland Company. And during that field trip, there was parked a 1903 Baker Electric that was owned by the company, and the boys started asking questions about electric cars, and said, well, the first cars were electric cars, and they'd come and gone, and at this particular time, it was the mid-70s. They got me to thinking about, well, maybe they're ripe to come again. And what happened is with a group of friends, we actually put together a car, actually the students put together a car, used my wife's Pinto, and as it turned out, the Pinto, we got it running and working and so forth, and that coincided.
So you replaced the whole...
We pulled out the engine and the gas tank and
replaced it with an
electric motor and
wow.
batteries and a control system. And the timing on it was the fact that we got it finished just as the Arabs turned oil off.
Oh.
And that project made the front page of the Cleveland Press, and I started to get contacts from people who said, well, have you ever thought of starting a business doing this? And I really had not. And but we did start the business, and it turned out to be a really exciting career choice for me. We wound up negotiating with Renault of America to buy vehicles without engines, which we then provided a number of those to the U.S. government. In fact, one of our cars was in President Carter's inaugural parade, driven by the Secretary of Energy. The sequence of events, we wound up expanding the business. In fact, I was asked to testify before the Science and Technology Committee in Washington regarding a program to encourage electric vehicles in the United States. And that resulted in Public Law 94-413, which one part of it was one of the things I testified on, is the fact that all the manufacturers, and there were maybe a half a dozen companies doing what we were doing, but all the manufacturers were essentially undercapitalized, underfunded, and it was a very high-risk venture. And what we had needed in order to make a workable system was a market, maybe a government-subsidized market, and loan guarantees to expand our facility. And that was part of the law, and we were the first of the companies to receive a loan guarantee. And we expanded our plant in actually a suburb of Cleveland, and we were producing vehicles and selling them and shipping them actually all over the world. Shipped vehicles. We sold vehicles to Toyota. We sold vehicles to General Motors, which was kind of interesting. They went to Bolivia. So they were pretty much widely dispersed. The bulk of the vehicles, though, were in the United States. We sold fleets of vehicles to utility companies, Long Island Lighting and Con Ed in New York. We also sold quite a few vehicles to the U.S. Navy, and which were used on the bases. Some of those cars are still in service. It was a very interesting.
You mean they still use them today?
Well, yeah.
Wow.
The other thing that happened during that period of time is that we wound up purchasing two divisions from Otis Elevator, one that was making electric buses and one that was making electric postal vans. And that project was in towards the tail end of our business, because in 1980 the politics changed, and the new administration came in and said, well, you know, we don't need these we don't need buy these vehicles, we don't need demonstration programs. And we were part of that whole change of attitude that also resulted in the solar panels that President Carter had put on the White House being removed. So it's kind of a complete turnaround. And so essentially what happened, the government came to us at that point and said, you know, the contract we have for these vehicles, we're not going to buy them. And by the way, we want our money back. And so that caused the company to essentially collapse. And at the same time,
so they called loan on all the money they had given you through those loan guarantees.
So what happened is they had an auction, and they auctioned off the equipment and the vehicles that were in process and so forth. It was a rather disappointing and bleak time. However, at the same time, I got an offer from a gentleman who had an investment in an electric car company here in Las Vegas. And he said, well, it seems that you're an expert in winding down companies, so why don't you come and see if you could save my company? And he made me an offer which really was a very nice offer to move me and my family to Las Vegas. And the terms of it were, you know, we'll give you 6 months to see what could happen, and at the end of the 6 months, we'll make a decision whether the company is going to continue or not. And as it turned out, in 6 months, without the government assistance any longer, there was no viable market for these vehicles. And I told them, well, we did our best, but the
Market
it's
just
just not
wasn't
going to
there.
work. It's just not going to work out. And part of the negotiation was the fact that he said, well, I will guarantee 2 years' salary for you to come out
Hey.
to do this. And he was good to his word. And from there I went on to other things. And I happened to have a knack for being able to either turn companies around or to spot problems and solve them, and did some business consulting of that for businesses in Las Vegas for a couple of years. And one of my clients gave me a task to find out why their construction-related company had not made money in a period of time. And the four gentlemen that owned this company were very wealthy, well-known people, and they were concerned because they had contracts. And so I went in and developed a business plan. I found that there was some internal shrinkage based upon some employees that had done the wrong thing, and so those corrections were made. And a couple weeks later, after I submitted the report to them, they called me back and said, well, we want to ask you about your business plan that you've given for us. And I said, okay, well, fine, I'll meet with you. And they said, well, we wanted to talk to you about your number one recommendation was that we sell the company. And I had made that recommendation because no matter what they had done or how much more money they would pour into that company, the amount of profit for them wouldn't make any sense. And I said, this really is an owner-operator type of business, and you need to have somebody that's willing to do 2 or 3 things in order to make it go. And says, well, we want to take your recommendation. I said, well, how does that affect me? They said, well, we want to sell it to you. And I really said, no, I don't think I want to do that. But they made a very attractive offer, and the company had accounts receivable, and they had contracts in place, and their main concern was these contracts being completed. And so my wife and I decided, okay, we'll give this a shot. And so we took over the company, and in the space of about 2 years, it was running 7 days a week, 24 hours, we had 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. We did, the company made cultured marble, and we supplied sinks and bathtubs and countertops. We did all of the countertops at Whiskey Pete's, and we did the Aladdin remodel. When they did that, we did the Mint remodel, and then we did a lot of homes. We did some U.S. homes and metropolitan homes, and the business was really, really booming. And I had tried to convince my brother, who lived in Cleveland, to come to Las Vegas and help me run the shop, and I just couldn't convince him to make that break. And for me, the next thing would have been to make an investment in more mechanization, more equipment, and I didn't want to really do that unless I had somebody I could really trust with me. So I wound up selling that company to a national marble company.
Oh, wow.
And moving on, and actually at that time getting back into my love for electronics and gadgetry and so forth. And I started a company called LaserFax, which the idea then was putting all of the data from the county and city mainframes on a CD-ROM. Well, back in the mid-1980s, a CD-ROM was not a normal thing to do. It had just been introduced by Sony, and but we were able to take the county assessor's records and the state plane coordinates and the business license information and convert it from the IBM mainframe to a format that the PC could use. And then I developed a retrieval scheme to retrieve this information from the CD. And so if you were a real estate agent, you would say, give me all of the 3-bedroom homes with a pool with a square footage of 2,000 feet or less, and between Decatur and Charleston within a 1 mile. And the thing would go and churn and pull all this up, which was at the time pretty
Seems
advanced.
pretty standard today.
It's very standard today, but back then it was considered an impossibility to do. But it was a fun project. As it turned out, that company was bought by a insurance premium finance company that wanted the technology, and they offered me a job as their MIS guy, and so I went into that, put that hat on, and went into that. And then when that business, when they were going to move it back to Texas, I had a 6-month period. They were going to wind down the business here, and so I wound it down, and I had that 6-month opportunity to figure out, well, what are we going to do now? And at that point, my boys, my 2 sons, Marshall and Mitchell, were at UNLV in school, and I thought it'd be neat to have a business where they were involved. And the one boy, Mitchell, suggested, why don't we put together a bulletin board, dial-up bulletin board for game players and so forth.
Okay.
And we went to a trade show in Atlanta and saw what other people were doing, and one of the things I noticed was there were a couple people there that were experimenting with putting the internet on dial-up. And I thought, well, that would be pretty neat. And so what we did is we started a company called Access Nevada.
Okay.
And located here in Boulder City, right on Nevada Way, in the little shopping center on Nevada Way, 500 square foot office.
Is the building still there?
Oh yeah, it's there. It's the real estate office. Well, the mortuary's on the end, and the broadband insurance is at the other end.
Oh yeah,
and we were right in the middle, right at a little 500.
So right next to 7-Eleven there.
Well, yeah, right next to it. And well, as it turned out, that the internet in the late '90s was a blossoming, expanding, but many people didn't know what it was. And what we did is we started having seminars on Saturdays at one of the computer stores in Las Vegas, a free seminar about the internet and explaining what it was. And I remember holding up a business card, and I said, sometime in the future you're going to see your email address on your business card instead of your fax number. And people said, no, that's not going to happen. Well, the internet, the growth of the internet has been just phenomenal. So it turned out one of the things that we did is that we determined that one of the things, you're providing a service to people, and so we decided that we would have 24-hour service live, no phone answering machines. You call our number, you got a human being to talk to you. In fact, when we were doing our sales pitches to businesses, one of the points that I made is I said, well, you want to know which internet provider to use, set your alarm clock for 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and then call around to see what kind of service you can get. And because I knew that we would
be the only one.
We'd be right there. The other feature that we did is that at that time, the internet, you paid by the minute or by the hour. And
even I remember that.
Yeah, and so Yeah, so we featured unlimited internet, and
Oh.
for a flat fee and a flat annual fee or a flat monthly fee. Well, the long story short on that is that we grew to the point that we outgrew the number of telephone lines we could, because there was dial-up modems back in that day, that we could have at the Bob Blair's building there, the Realty office shopping center. And so we moved over to Yucca and Foothill, and in a space of a year we ran out of phone lines in Boulder City.
Oh, wow.
And the phone company said, we just don't have any more individual lines that we can give you. And so then we moved into a central office in Las Vegas, and we also moved the business into Las Vegas, since that was where most of the customers were. But one of the things that we did is on the service is I like to hire high school, not college kids really, to answer questions and do a little training with them. And a lot of times I joked around about the service is very important. Somebody that does not have an understanding of technology, they may be very intelligent, very smart, and you don't want to insult them. And so I often tell, when I was training the service people, I said, the thing that probably is more important for my service people is to have a background on a suicide hotline as opposed to having technical knowledge, and being able to talk to people and being rational and give them respect. And that's in a business, one of the things that I saw that was very necessary is showing respect for your customers. And now in my new political career, that's also a philosophy. There are people that have disagree with me, and I understand that. And but you got, at the end of the day, they're human beings, and you respect them and treat them fairly.
So is that did you retire from the?
Well, we saw that one another sale to another
Okay.
national company, and when I sold that, the funny story about that is the national company came in, and these guys, they know everything. They're high-priced lawyers, or the way we don't want you to compete with us, so you have to sign a 2-year non-compete. Meanwhile, my two sons, who were equally important in the business, didn't even ask them if they wanted to non-compete. So on the day of the sale, that Access Nevada was sold, Aspireworks and Aspire Site came into being, and so those two businesses are actually active today. My two boys have that today. The real sad story on that was when we were, we had sold the company and we figured we're going to reinvest. We hired a marketing guy to come in and help us with developing brochures, and actually had video calling cards to give out. But it spent a lot of money, and we were going to have a professional managed launch.
Okay.
And it was going to be at one of the non-gaming hotels in Las Vegas. We had printed engraved invitations sent out to all our Access Nevada people and all of the other businesses that may have an interest in it. Of course, all the television stations.
Wow.
The marketing guy, I'll get them all there. They'll be there, especially because we're going to have a breakfast for them. So we had a breakfast buffet type of thing. And so we printed all those invitations, sent them out, got all prepared. We, did an analysis of what would be the best day of the week, best time, and all this stuff is, just timed
Really
perfectly. Honing it right. This is going to be a home run smash. And the date of that launch, the press launch, and the time was 7 o'clock on September 11th,
Oh,
2001.
wow.
So not only did we have no press, the,
Yeah.
but we made the best of it. Because the airport was closed, we went to the lobby. There were the guests of the hotel were milling about, and we said, "Why don't you come in and have breakfast and come in and do that?" And we did our canned presentation to all of these people from Sheboygan and New York, whether they don't even know why we're there, but figured why let the food go to waste and why let our preparations go to waste. But that was a very dark period in our nation's history. Obviously, it was a dark period for us, but I have to say we put our nose down and dug through it, and those two business. I've excused myself from the businesses. The boys are doing a fine job running them, and they, like I said, they're running today. I set up an office here in Boulder City at the hotel for, again, my consulting work, and I got a job with Rocky Research here in town. They had a problem, and they asked if I could come in and resolve it. Their problem was that their IT person, who was actually a chemical engineer, was pregnant, and she had given them notice that she was going to leave. And she was in the middle of migrating their database, a gigantic database, from Microsoft Access to SQL, which is a different type of database system. And so I was asked, can you help us do this? And the fact is that this is a live production database. It's being used every day to record information and to retrieve information. So they couldn't afford anything like a downtime. So it had to be pretty transparent. So we did get that moved over, and before she had her child, and everything worked out. And Mr. Rockefeller asked me, he said, "Well, do you know anything about computers other than the programming?" And I said, "Yeah." He had a problem with some computers for the Navy that were overheating, and wanted me to analyze that. And I dug in on that issue and determined that the motherboards that were being used were misdesigned. There was a flaw in the design of the system, which is usually when you come up with that kind of a solution to a big manufacturer, there's no way, the pipsqueak guy in Boulder City's telling us that we made a mistake. Well, they did, and they admitted that there was an issue, and well, that one.
That's good.
So that kind of convinced, I guess, Mr. Rockefeller says, "Well, why don't you come to work for us?" Because I'd been a consultant, and the thing I really didn't want to do that. One of the things about being your own boss is you always know what the boss is thinking, and I like that aspect of it. But he convinced me, and it's about 7 years I spent there, and we did a number of things, got them a number of patents, worked on some very interesting projects up there at the corner of Foothill and Yucca. We built a motor dynamometer test system. We did work with the Navy again in building a fully compliant motor control system that the major manufacturers had difficulty meeting the federal regulations for electromagnetic interference. And this was one of the, being an amateur radio operator since the age of 13, had some knowledge in that regard. But we got that project, and probably one of the things I'm proudest of is that the two prototypes that we delivered were put on the flagship of the Sixth Fleet, the USS Mount Whitney.
Oh, wow.
It's interesting that in World War II, World War I, World War II, the flagships were battleships. And then after World War II, the flagships became aircraft carriers. Now the flagship of the Sixth Fleet is a command and control, essentially a spy ship, which is interesting how the that has changed, morphed from the 16-inch guns to microprocessors being the most important thing.
Yeah.
So that, and then I did retire from Rocky, and just this last year in January, when the discussion came up about the 2 open council seats, and my wife and I talked about that, and she convinced me, you ought to run, you ought to do that. And I was a kind of a willing suspect because even as a kid, I had always felt I always had an interest in politics, and I always thought that it would be an interesting thing to do, to run an election and serve in a public capacity. And so this was my first attempt. I had absolutely no hands-on political experience, and I did not use any political consultancy. But
well, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of that. But before I do, I think it's interesting to see so much of your history. Not only that, I didn't know you were a Dr. Harhay. So that's,
well, I don't use that.
Don't use the doctor.
No, I don't use it. It really doesn't, for me, I have business cards. When I was in Washington, I used that. Because when you're dealing with generals and colonels and other PhDs, it's almost, it's a thing of acceptance. Okay, well, he's good, he's a good guy, But really, doctorates, somebody had asked about it, and the best description I had is it's basically somebody that has a lot of Sitzenfleisch, is able to sit through the period and do the thing. But
well, and also I didn't realize how many companies you had been involved in. I mean, and one of them was an electric car company.
Yes.
You're practically an Elon Musk.
Well, I was 40 years ahead of my time, really.
Yeah.
The thing that Elon Musk has done is he's got the great timing, and some of the same things that we used back in the day in the late 70s, early 80s. The politics changed again, and they've changed again once more. But and that is a real concern when you base your business on something that politically can change.
Yeah, it can change so quickly.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you so I know you talked about the business coming out here, the Access Nevada. What was it that first attracted you to Boulder City, and when did you personally first move to Boulder City?
Well, 1982, when I got the offer to come out to run this company in Las Vegas, I actually came here and was here for 6 months. And as I was in Cleveland, I was a Rotarian. I've been a Rotarian for some time, since the 70s. I went to a Rotary.
When you say Rotarian, it's in the Rotary
Club, right. And I was actually attended the Southwest Rotary in Las Vegas. And one of the members there was a real estate agent. And so I hooked up with him, and I said, listen, we're going to buy a house. We're going to move here to Southern Nevada. Can you help me out in the search? And so we did. We went to all of the communities, looked at all of the houses, was intrigued at that time. That was when Green Valley was still being built up.
Okay.
And so looked at that. But then when we came to Boulder City, the thing that impressed me was it was autonomous. It was separate. It was not part of the sprawl of the valley. And The other thing that was very impressive is the sense of community, and I describe it as a fierce sense of community, and that exists to this day. But the fact that it had its own police force, its own fire department, and the quaint nature of the town, and the fact that the house that we looked at just seemed to be ideal. It was a house over on Darlene Way. It was only 6 months old, and the owner of the home was a bank manager who was being transferred to Reno, and the bank was willing to make at that time interest rates were spectacularly high.
All right.
Was to make a very good arrangement on the purchase of the home, and it had a swimming pool and a spa, and had the desert behind it, no houses behind it, and so I bought the house without my wife having seen it. So the first time the boys and my wife saw the house was when they got off the plane to move here.
But it worked out. She didn't.
Oh well.
She didn't run away. It looked like.
No, she didn't run away because I pretty much knew what would make her happy in terms of that. And that was the other thing, is that the move to Boulder City was, from a cultural standpoint, I thought more of an easy acclimation because of the fact that it's more like a Midwest town. It's really a unique place in that, yes, it's got the Southwest and the Western flair and so forth, but it also feels like a Midwestern town. So that I knew that would, and the fact that the kids could walk to school, and in fact that's the other thing that we had researched, the schools and the other cultural aspects of the fact, and the fact that it had its own hospital. So these were all very positive elements in the decision. Not that some of these other candidates didn't have that, but if I ask you to show me the dividing line between Las Vegas and Henderson or Green Valley and another community,
You're a real challenge.
It's a sprawl. It's just all kind of a big. But the fact that Boulder City is unique in that regard, it has its own identity and its own spirit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you started to mention about getting into the race, and that you had thought about it in the past, but your wife really convinced you.
She was the one that convinced me, and the other thing that's an issue is, and I didn't make a point of it, but I had a health issue, and I'm on dialysis. I had a kidney failure as a result of a diagnostic procedure. I had a heart attack, and the dyes that were used to diagnose the blockage in the heart actually was toxic to my kidneys, and for many people, they are able to recover in the period of a month from that toxicity. In my case, I did not, and so I was on dialysis. And one of the things I noticed is that many of the people on dialysis give up. They figure their life was over because they're kind of chained to the machine. And I thought that, well, for a couple of reasons, that I could be an example to some folks not to give up, and that if you have your mental facilities intact, that you could still make a contribution and still perform a service. In that regard, I have a machine in my house, and so it's not as onerous as for somebody who has to go to a center and has a distinct time they've got to appear, and so forth. So I can schedule my treatment in such a way that it gives me either a full day. In many cases, during the week, we start the treatment at 3 in the morning.
Whoa.
And that way, though, when at the end of the treatment, I've got a full day to do whatever I need to do. And so it doesn't need to be a sentence that you're doomed to a particular schedule or whatever. You make the best of what you can do and continue on and make a contribution. So it's that was a part of it, and that was a concern. In fact, when I ran, one of the things before I ran, I visited my doctors and asked them, was there any reason why they felt that there was any impediment to serve on city council. And in fact, I even got a letter from one to whom it may concern letter, because I thought that this would be something that may come up during the election as here's your candidates half dead. Why would you want to vote for this guy? So I wanted to be able to answer that directly. But again, it's
Did it come up at all?
no. The only time that it may have come up was there was a question raised. Is there was a meet and greet at Milo's just before the election, and I had to go in for a treatment that lasted a week. I had to be hospitalized for a week.
Oh.
What I had is my surrogates, which was my sons and my grandkids, show up at the meet and greet and answer questions or whatever in my stead. But that was the only thing that I was concerned about. But it has not come up. And I did have a health scare here a couple months ago that I'm still working out on. But you take these things one at a time and burrow on ahead.
Yeah.
So.
Well, speaking of the election process, you ran a very unique race when you look compared to other people in the past, particularly in regards to finances. You mentioned you didn't have a manager; you did all your own, correct?
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, most of it was personally financed, right?
All of it.
All of it. So you didn't raise any money outside of your own.
I took no money from the outside. The only money that was taken was that was disclosed in the financial disclosure forms is $130 that my wife wrote a check for the delicacies that was served at one of my town hall meetings to Chili Jillies.
Okay.
But and so that was disclosed there. But that was everything else I paid for, and but I thought about this when I thought about running. I thought, well, here I am, a nobody. Nobody knows me in terms of the political arena. So realistically, how much money am I going to raise? Probably not much at all. And certainly I don't know any of the power brokers who have contributed heavily to the other folks.
Right.
So I have no contact with them and have no reason to contact them. So realistically, what am I going to gain by trying to raise money? So I figured, well, I talked with, in fact, I met with Duncan McCoy and asked him for some advice. I was, how much did your campaign cost, and what did you feel the most effective way of campaigning was? And he gave me some tips. I know that he's given other people tips too as well, so I wasn't privy to any primary thing from him. But the fact is that I decided, well, I'm just going to do this on my own, and I'm going to. And in one of these interviews, I called myself a cheapskate, and said, well, I got to be a cheapskate. I'm not going to be spending money as like water. In fact, I was very proud of the fact that my signs, my yard signs, which I limited, and on an altruistic basis, that I found them to be litter and obnoxious to begin with, and so I was going to limit the number. Well, the real reason was I didn't want to buy it more than I had to, and as it turned out, I used every single one. But I bought my signs from cheapsigns.com in some Austin, Texas, I think it was, and I found out that I was paying half of what some of the other people were paying for signs. And of course, some had the oversized signs. I had one sign size, and that was it. But everything was done basically. If you were spending your own money, how would you do it?
You're a little more careful with it.
You would be very careful. And when you're spending other people's money, well, then you have your photographer, your paid photographer, and the paid printing companies, and in a couple of cases, they had consultancies that they paid tens of thousands of dollars for. And my consultancy was essentially Google and Wikipedia. And honestly, I did look up how do you win a campaign. I actually Googled campaigning and what do's and don'ts, and started reading histories of people of what was successful and what wasn't. And but then, as it turned out, the thing I enjoyed the most, I actually enjoyed. I joke about it, being at my office at the credit union on Friday afternoons, of meeting and talking with folks. I enjoyed the town halls. I enjoyed talking with people. I enjoyed listening to the different opinions. It really was a very positive thing for me. I really liked that, and I still like that. In fact, as you know, I do the coffee at Starbucks on Saturday afternoons, and I enjoy that. No matter how many people show up, I think it's very worthwhile. But I have to tell you that I really enjoy being a councilman. I really
good.
I enjoy the challenge, and there isn't a week that doesn't go by I learn something new about Boulder City. Sometimes it's not good, but you want to make a difference, you want to make a change. So
yeah. So I want to ask you about, going back to how you ran. Do you think it was a unique set of circumstances that made it work out, even though you were doing just your own money, low funding? Or would you say, hey, that's a model that would work for other people as well? We don't need to spend so much on elections.
Well, I really don't think you need to spend that much money. $30,000 on
a town of 15,000.
Yeah. The thing. I think one of the things that's spectacular was when you do the math and you figure out how much each vote cost, and I'm kind of appalled that it costs as much as on mine as it did, but yeah, the money in politics, people talk about it's a way of keeping track now. It's you read in the paper about some of these congressional races or the governor's race, and the person's worth is starting to be measured as how much accumulated they have in their war chest.
Yeah.
And there's very little discussion about what really do they stand for. But one thing that is definite, you do things differently when you're spending your own money. You're much more prudent. You're much more selective. And I couldn't have done it any other way. In fact, the thing that was probably the most encouraging is being at the senior center and having this elderly ladies come up and they've got $100 bill folded up in their hand and going to give it to me. He says, I want you to have this. I want for your, and that happened many, many times. It happened, in fact, once at the office at the credit union, a gentleman came up and put a check in my pocket. I didn't know what it was. He just put something in my pocket and left. And then later I saw it was a substantial check made out to me. And actually not made out to the campaign. It was made out to me personally. And I yelled out. I said, you know, I'm not taking contributions. And said, whatever. And then again at a town hall.
So did you get him back the check or just
Well,
not
I'll tell you
cash
what
it?
happened, because I got another check at the town hall in an envelope, in a sealed envelope. When we got home, again, a substantial check from somebody, and again, it was mailed out to me personally. And I took both of those checks and signed them over to Linda Hand.
Oh, okay.
So, and it would have been very easy to just sign the back of them and get the dough and
Yeah.
say thank you very much, or report it. But the simple thing is if you don't take any money from anybody, you don't have to do anything other than report what you have spent. So the money in politics is very disturbing. In fact, that if you have an inability to raise the funds, it may in fact impede somebody from even filing or starting.
Right.
Now there's some people that I've for this upcoming election that I already said, well, if you run, I'll pay your registration fee. Of course, that's $25. But trying to encourage as many people as possible to participate. But it is, you know, in the terms of this past election, it's a $10,000 investment in terms of getting elected. The thing is that there's another story about the signs, and I was sitting at Starbucks, and a person came up to me, and this was after one of the meetings where that the Review Journal, or not, the BC Review had with the
different candidates.
Chamber, different, and said, you know, your presentation last night, you know, you're way too much snarky in your responses, and I know somebody that actually pulled up the signs and ripped them up. And I said, well, that brings tears to my eyes. The sign cost me $5. But I told him, snarky or not, that's me. I'm not going to change. I can't help it to be who I am. And
so did you said it was 10? Did it end up being about $10,000?
Yeah, about 10,000.
Wow. So that's neat that at least you're starting that trend of not taking your own, just doing your own money. Would you do it again if you ran again? Would you follow the same pattern?
Yeah, I would do the same thing. I definitely will. I don't think I'll have the opportunity, but I think it's something I believe in, and also the way you run a campaign or what you say, it's a reflection of you. And like I said, I didn't have anybody advising me. I just felt I got to do it the way I want to do it and say what I want to say. And if no one's my patron, they don't have any harness on me or strings attached. I can just be who I am and blurt out what I believe.
Well, and I wanted to lead into that, and that is you have been uniquely transparent as a councilman about your votes. I, for one, really appreciate your Facebook posts about what you looked into and why you voted the way that you did. But have you ever felt that being so transparent has backfired at you at all, or are you always glad that you do it? Or
No, I'm glad that they did. And the thing is that I feel that, and part of you as an engineer will know this, that as an engineer you're trained to be analytical, you're trained to do the research, you're trained to analyze the research and then build a hypothesis or a way to move forward. And it's just the training, and it works for me. And I feel compelled to show the reasoning behind my decisions, in that I wanted people, they may not agree with me, but I want them to see that I've taken the time to research the issue, that I've looked at the other sides, and I've come down to a decision based upon whatever I indicated. And in that regard, some of the decisions I know that have surprised people because of the fact that, one of the things that I was very pleased to receive was this endorsement by the Community Alliance, and and I have to say, some of those folks, without their assistance, I probably would not have been as successful as my election. However, one of the things that I mentioned when we had that selection process with all the candidates present was that I'm going to be independent. Whether you give me your blessing or not, I'm going to make a decision based upon what I believe is the correct path. And this, of course, is a couple of votes already. I've gotten been called a Judas and a Judas goat and a
I noticed on Storybook when it came down to the streets, the different votes.
Well, that was the second one for Storybook. The first one was actually DeSale.
Oh, right.
That was the one that angered a number of people because I was told, well, I was the deciding vote. Well, it's the last vote. I was every one of the other votes was a deciding vote, really.
Right.
But since I was the last vote, it was the one that was unexpected, and people thought that I would vote a certain way. But again, based upon what I felt was best for the bottom line is, in all these decisions, what do I feel is best for the citizens and businesses of Boulder City? That's the primary reason for making a decision one way or the other. And I thought that I would agree that there's a kind of a botched negotiation and a deal, and the fact that the sale was taking place in such a period of chaos and turmoil in our city government was kind of miraculous that this thing was going to work at least. I'm hopeful that now with our upcoming selection of a new city manager, he will be able to bring the team together, and we'll have some less storm and drang.
Well, I want to talk about that. One of the most controversial things that has happened since you've been councilman is the appointment of Steve Morris to the city to be city attorney. And I know you were one of the dissenting votes in that, on the 3-2. But can you compare that process to how we went with the city selecting our current city manager, and what you feel are the pros or cons, or have we improved the process, or what? Just talk a little bit about that.
Well, the fact that the two processes were so different, like night and day. One of the things that was different is the fact that obviously we used an outside consultancy to pre-screen all of the candidates, and to although they did exactly what we did in terms of putting them basically in three different piles of candidates. The thing that in terms of the city attorney selection, that selection process if there was a thing about being too transparent, one of the problems that I had with that was the fact that the information was available and certain individuals took it upon themselves to do a citizen's interview or an intercession in the process, which I feel caused multiple problems. It caused not only a problem in terms of the selection of the city attorney, but it had caused problems in the selection of our new city manager.
Okay.
That whole process, if you remember back in the city council discussions and public comments and so forth, it was heated. Some of it was uncalled for. But in terms of the city attorney selection, the candidates for city manager were watching streaming coverage. And from what I understand from the consultant that was hired, is that there were at least a few of those candidates who said, we're not no part of this.
Pulled out because of
They pulled
just
out
the consternation
because of what
and
they saw, yes. Yeah. And that is really a detriment to us because it, again, limited the choices that we had. So that was a really, for me, disturbing thing. But that was, the whole thing was botched from a number of different errors made by city staff. The fact that the resume supposedly was attached but wasn't attached or wasn't forwarded and no one notices it and whatever, that became a real issue. However, my feeling is, and I repeatedly made this point, is that it made no material difference because all the information on that resume was on the actual application.
Okay.
So there's nothing new there. But the fact that there was a failure in a number of different areas, and the fact that certain materials weren't available for the public to see at that particular meeting, now causes this investigation, which is yet to determine what the problem is, and
yeah,
so it's got an ongoing fester.
To ask you about that, it seems the Boulder City Review Journal recently wrote about what we're paying our lawyer Steve Morris and the fact that we're not going into contract with him because of these outstanding procedure. Do you feel that we should go ahead and go into contract, or should we wait and see if these, so that it can be overturned if necessary?
Well, I had, in regards to that, I had the idea that perhaps as a city council, we could request of the Attorney General's office an expedited decision in that regard. And then I thought better of it. The thing is, in an ethics investigation, I don't think you
don't want to look like you're rushing.
You don't want to prod anybody into a decision that you would regret later.
Yeah.
It's really a dilemma because it's a legal issue, and the acting city attorney is the person that you would ask for their legal opinion.
Right.
And so it's a real quagmire in terms of that. It does appear, and be careful in the wording it, that the advantage is being maximized financially,
yeah,
to the detriment of the city, that's something I think that I think we would not be in this position if we had a stronger staff. If we had, for example, this Peltier from our new city finance director, I think that's somebody who could stand up and say, hey, we got to be in compliance, we got to do something. The fact that you have somebody who's filling in doesn't have the authority to issue that, the fact that the acting city manager again doesn't have
He's only
authority,
acting.
and then these people, they all have to work together and whatever. I don't know what the answer is, because of the fact that the person that you would rely upon for a decision would be deciding on something and
That they
that
benefit from.
they've got a conflict of interest in.
Yeah.
So it's a nasty situation, and I think one of the things, I don't think it really has been brought to council's attention for a discussion about it. I think one of the things that I had thought that the fact that he had an existing contract covered the legal thing of having a contract in place. The thing is that existing contract was as a support or as an assistant, not as the actual.
Well, it's very expensive if we
Yes,
leave it.
oh, yeah,
The
it's-
existing contract.
I would hope that Mr. Morris would come forward with a solution on his own on this thing. And I don't know what that could be.
Gotcha.
One of the things that is, I might say that is a kind of a surprise going on council, is finding how the protocols and process is so restrictive in getting something done. I know that in talking to Mr. McManus, and I shared this thing about the fact that, you know, we come in there with, we want to go in there with guns blazing
Yeah.
and find out
Really
that all
change everything.
all of a sudden you've got a gigantic procedural wall to climb to get anything done, and and I understand the reasons for that, but it's frustrating, and it's also frustrating that you can't, because of the open meeting law, the restrictions placed upon the fact that you can only talk to maybe one other councilman to share information on any item.
Yeah, and as I've talked to council members, that does seem, I understand the reason for open meeting law, and it does seem very valid, but do you feel that there is a need to change? Because I've been amazed. Early on I had discussions, this is a few years back when Cam was on council, and I asked him about a particular issue, and he said, well, I can't really talk to anybody about that. If you want to call them, you're welcome to call the other council members and talk to about them, but I can't. And it seems like that is a very tough environment to move things in, where your only conversations have to occur at the meetings in a very formal thing. Do you feel that there needs to be a change there?
I think there should be some mechanism that we could share information. But again, to meet the spirit of the open meeting law, to make sure that everybody's aware of what the communication is. The reality is that for many issues, I'm educated by what I see in the newspaper as opposed to what I hear from other people in the staff or the on council.
So you rely kind of from third party coming in and getting the info.
Yeah, you know, one of the things and a decision maker doesn't like to be surprised. Like they have the facts ahead of them, and the surprises, you know, you don't want to make snap judgments based on stuff that you would not be able to validate or to understand. So it is a dilemma that I don't know how to resolve it, other than to just keep your ears open and try to pick up as much as you can regarding an issue or a point. In this regard, that the big issue, I think, that's not on the agenda, but I think should be at some point, or some discussion about the embarrassment regarding one of the staff members just this last week being fined by the Ethics Commission.
Oh yeah, HR, the head of HR fined
Yeah.
for using the
Yeah,
building.
Well, yeah, Channel 8 News calls him the #2 man in Boulder City. And I don't know if that's appropriate.
Well, on that ethics one, there's been some others, as well as there's been some issues that are still outstanding regarding the old police chief. Throughout a lot of these things, a lot of people have brought up a Mormon bias inside Boulder City and inside City Hall. What are your feelings? Is there a Mormon bias there?
Well, I haven't seen it directly. I haven't had any. However, I find the interjection of religion into politics is a despicable and avoidable action. I really, I have not seen any direct involvement of it. The thing is that people talk about a voting block of 3-2 always, or whatever. But the fact that it's sanctioned by the church or sanctioned by the some other organization, I don't see any evidence of that. The fact is that when you do have a small town and you've got predominant groups that are socially active in each other, it's kind of just a kind of a natural byproduct of that. The point that, in fact, that was one of the things I was cautioned at when I ran. I said, well, you don't have, I remember being in Postnet and the fellow coming up and saying, you don't have a chance. He said, you know, that Mormon block, you don't have a shot. And which is kind of interesting because the results didn't show that.
Yeah.
But I've spoken out about that. The fact that I found people, there are people that have posted on Facebook and other social medias about the negative thing about, and I disagree with that. It's uncalled for. It's unnecessary. And there's no proof of it. The fact is that, the fact that people have a social connection, it has little or nothing to do with the whatever their religious belief is. But the fact is that the Church of the Latter-day Saints has always had a strong civic-minded bent and encouragement for its members to be involved in civic events. It's just part of their theology, I guess, and the same thing with scouting and so forth. They're and I find those are good things. I'm not. I have kind of ambivalent. I'm not. Have really no feeling of fear of church influence. I'm actually more concerned about the radical fundamentalist Christians and their influence on politics and influence in politics than our own local situation.
Okay. And on when you talk about radical groups, I noticed on one, going back to a controversial vote on Storybook, one of your write-ups, you said, I'm not a no-growth person. I know some are, but it's about finding the right amount of growth. And as we know that it looks like we're moving forward with the sale of that land and that there are going to be some homes built, how do we work forward in finding that right amount of growth? Is it now that we have that sold, is it time to start talking about selling land, or do we need to let that mature a little bit before we put up other lands to be voted on?
Well, one of the things that some of the negative comments regarding the storybook thing is that deal is setting a precedence that's going to turn us into Henderson, which I find laughable from the standpoint that Henderson next year is going to build 13,000 homes in Henderson.
Wow.
We're going to build maybe 60 or maybe 100. So the one that just on a physical basis that doesn't work. But the right amount of growth, I think we're gonna see with the storybook homes how well those houses sell. There's more of a traditional development as opposed to what the cottages are. They're not kind of a non-traditional.
They're kind of a four townplex or something.
Yeah, four townhomes. The fact that we're actually starting to look at track 350, which is the adjacent track to 349 now, that already is underway. What I'm really encouraged about it is the fact that they're talking about precedent, and my feeling about the precedent is I hope it's a precedent, in that the precedent would be that a developer can produce a modest number of homes and become profitable and be profitable and be successful. That would be a good precedent for the city. And certainly we're not anywhere close to the 120 home point. The citizens have already very loudly said we like the way things are and don't mess with them. And so I think that is important to follow that direction.
Would you see a time, they spoke very loudly, they didn't want to change the 30 home per developer limit. Would you think it would be too aggressive to have two side-by-side developers working, so they're each putting up 30 homes in a given year?
Well, they could do that. Yeah.
And you would, but we'd have to get some more land on.
Well, they'd have to have the land to do that. Yes, yeah. But they could do that now. In fact, Storybook may be able to build or pull permits for 60 houses this year, 30 in the first half of the last half.
If they're not taken, they're able to pull additional.
Right. So that can very well happen. The point is that there are people feeling that the growth will pay for itself, and then there are the others who feel no, that's not the case. Especially when you talk about us in terms of infrastructure, in terms of water and utilities, which is a whole new can of worms that is continually unfolding.
Well, that'd be the last thing I wanted to ask you about. If you don't mind, we jump to utilities. Yeah. And that is, the utility raises, I think, have been very controversial. They were voted in before you were in council. You've started to take a real look at that, I know. Do you think that you will be proposing before the next rate increase whether or not to stop that or adjust those?
From what I've been able to determine now, at this point, I think that we need to take a hard second look at these upcoming rate increases. The thing that I think I would like to see happen, and before I propose it, I've got to put a lot more meat on the skeleton of the idea, is a utility commission, not a rate commission, but a utility commission that oversees not only electrical system but also as the water, and the water is going to be a substantial increase coming up here as well. The whole utility thing really bothers me from a number of different standpoints. One, our utility manager, electric utility manager, he's already said that they're thinly staffed, and so there's no doubt that he could use some assistance. And we have discovered a wealth of people in the community that have direct skills that would be applicable to advising our utility department, not only in terms of rates, whatever, but also from the technical aspects. The one gentleman that I met with frequently on Saturdays was a commissioner on a utility of a small town that had a municipal electric utility in Arizona. And he discussed how their utility commission came about and what they did. And that's what I would say is being able to not having not directing, but having an input not only in rates but also in where do we want to go in terms of infrastructure development, where do we want to go in the future in terms of perhaps solar or energy storage or any of these other things that are potential avenues for us to pursue. The thing that really frosts me more than anything else is the present single debt of Boulder City is this raw water line. And what's not discussed is the fact that it essentially is being mostly unused, because the original intent of this thing was to service golf course development in Boulder City. We'd be the golf course nirvana of southern Nevada, and as it turns out, I think only Cascada is using that water now.
Oh, okay.
And there's a gigantic reservoir that's there and
Is
being
there a thought of
underutilized.
using it to connect it to the other golf courses?
Well, I think there's a cost, of course, with that.
Yeah, right.
And the fact that this tremendous amount of money, it's essentially the same amount of money that could have been used to build a new pool.
Oh, okay.
And it's in that same
Ballpark.
of numbers, which I feel would have been much more valuable to the citizens of Boulder City than this basically unused pipe.
And you think something like that may have been caught by a commission
Well,
if that had been set up previously?
the problem I see is the fact that, and this would be the rates. I don't know if you have looked at the documents that were presented to council regarding rates and structures and whatever.
I looked
it
at
is.
one report, but it was clearly insufficient
Yeah,
on its own.
The thing that the reality is, and I'm not don't want to deprecate the intelligence or the training of my fellow council members, but I would believe most of them, it's gobbledygook. When you're talking about the electrical infrastructure, and you're talking about electrical demands and the megawatt hour consumption versus whatever. I think that flies over the head of most people. They're not trained in that, and which to me calls out for the creation of a utility commission. In fact, you go back in the history, we just go through this thing. We're being revised now, the Airport Commission.
All right.
The whole Airport Commission was developed because council realized they had no or little experience, knowledge or in terms of aviation law, the FAA requirements and so forth. And so the commission was created to advise council on these very technical issues. Well, I think the same situation is occurring now, or
With
has
utilities.
occurred for the utility commissions. And it calls out for something like it to be created to be added to as an assistant. You know, when you've got a commission that advises council on green fees.
So why not on utilities? Yeah.
You have a much more significant issue in terms of utility rates.
Yeah. Do you think if there would be time to develop the commission and still potentially make either alterations or stop the next hike in time, or do you think that will have to go forward and this is something down the road?
Well, what I would like to do is I'd like to be able to have the information that the case could be, a solid case could be made. One of the worst things that you could do, in fact, I was reading a criticism online of, there was one person that was very favorably predisposed to having this utility commission and wanted to be a part of it and whatever. And then recently his comments were, well, nothing's being done, it's lip service, whatever. Well, the thing that, when you're talking about something that is a tremendous amount of money in our utility system, you don't want to make a fool of yourself when you come up with proposals. And so a little bit, you know, the old thing about measure twice or cut once or
right.
whatever that comes into play, and so that is in the process of being done, the information being collected, and the other thing is being comparative information being collected from other utilities, municipal utilities, to see what's been done, because if things approaches have been successful in other communities, we should take a look and see what those were, and if we can adopt them or adapt them and utilize them to our benefit.
So let me make sure I understand the analogy. You're saying you would hate to jump in and stop the rate increase before we really have the data to back that up.
I would rather have a fully formed plan that, and then a rate increase. There's no law that says you can't decrease.
Right.
So if you find that there's an overpayment or there's no necessity for the increase, but again, it's the facts. It gets down to it's got to be based on factual analysis. You know, everybody would like to. I'd like to go back to the 3.2 cent per kilowatt hour that was here in 1982 that I paid. The thing that is different, though, is that we're paying much more for the electricity, even from the dam. It's no longer the super duper bargain that it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I think one of the problems that we had in terms of this present rate increase is the fact that some of the numbers were based on uncertainties regarding that Hoover Dam contract, because I believe that it was not fully in place. So that's one issue. The other thing that I think Mr. Dwyer is to be complimented on is pulling us out of Nevada Energy and forming the Silver State Energy Cooperative, which has reduced by millions of dollars our cost of electricity. But I noticed today in the newspaper the article that the Clark County School District is thinking of pulling out of the Nevada Energy as a supplier.
Really?
Yeah, building their own 195 megawatt power source solar.
Okay, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I do want to ask one last question.
Sure.
And that is, you mentioned there's a few people that you've encouraged to run. As 2019 gets closer, who are some of the names that you think would be a benefit to the council, that would be good candidates?
Well, one fellow I know that has really impressed me, and I've never met him before I ran for council, and is a fellow named Tom Clements.
Mm-hmm.
and he's a part of the Godby clan. So
I'm not familiar with that.
the folks that 31ers. So his I guess his grandfather,
Oh, okay.
Tom Godby,
Oh.
and his mother Isla. I don't know. You remember seeing that big picture of the penstock with the people standing in the penstock?
Uh-huh.
Well, Isla's the little girl in the center.
Oh, really?
And, yeah, and that's his mom.
It's a long
they're-
history with Boulder
they
City.
have a long history with Boulder City. But I was very impressed with him because of the fact that his analysis is factual. He goes down the topographical maps, plat maps, gets the reports, has them reproduced, and so he's taken a real interest in some of these subjects, and so I encouraged him. In fact, when there was an opening the last time on the Planning Commission, I nominated him for the Planning Commission. And
There's another opening now,
and I
right?
may be doing that again when that next nomination comes up. So he's one of the people that I would strongly encourage. The other folks, I would not want to mention their names basically because I wouldn't want them to embarrass some of the private discussions. But I would encourage anybody that has an interest and is willing to put in the time. The thing that is surprising to me is if you want to do this job, it can be a full-time job. You could be fully employed researching and digging and talking and gathering information. But it's rewarding in the fact that when you, even in little increments, you see things getting done or whatever. One of the things that I'm really kind of encouraged about is the fact that early on in the discussion regarding the pool, the new pool,
Mm-hmm.
one of the points I made strong point I made was, if this is going to be successful, what you really need to do is to have tremendous involvement of the community, encourage the community involvement. And I see that with these public meetings that they're holding. I see that I see that happening, and that's encouraging because it's going to be a heavy lift. It's not going to be cheap to build that pool. It would be nice if we could find somebody like the Max C. Fleischman Foundation that paid for half of the pool, and the LVCA that paid for the other half back in 1979 when it was built.
Oh, really? I didn't know about that.
Very little city money went into that pool. Half of it came from Max Fleischman's foundation and half from the Convention Visitors Authority, and a little bit from Levi Strauss.
Think there's any chance for any people like that, Convention Authority, maybe putting in money again?
I think they have excused themselves from doing it. But the real issue now is, in fact, is the government, many of these federal programs have dried up or are in the process of drying up. I would hope that some may be still in place for rural, which we are, that we could take advantage of. But the unknown is the private foundations. If you can find an interest, private foundations for a contribution, that would be great. Of course, somebody suggested, and I thought it was interesting, is the SEMPRA Boulder City Community Pool, or the
getting somebody to get the name.
Yeah, Copper Mountain 6.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Maybe we could talk to some of the local businesses. Maybe the Dillinger wants the name on it.
Well, I think the Turners are they got their eyes on another project, from what I understand, and we'll see. No, it's a great. You got a number of great folks here in town that are active in that regard, and certainly want to encourage their continued development and participation. That it makes our town much more a livable place.
Yeah, it's true. Then, so I promise this is my last one. Any chance we see your name on 2019 for mayor?
For mayor, I don't think. Well, we should never say never, right?
Yeah.
But I have to admit, one of the things, why does somebody do what they do or run for council? And back last year in January, when I'd walk into the senior center, and I'd see the pictures of all the councilmen on the wall, and I'd have to think to myself, yeah, it would be kind of nice to have your picture up there. Well, yesterday I was at the senior center. When I walked in, the lady at the desk turned around and pointed at my picture. They have the pictures up now. They haven't had them for some time. And so walking down the hallway of City Hall and seeing the pictures of all the mayors.
One more place you can have your picture.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think that the demands of that position may be a little bit more than what I'd be able to undertake, but I certainly would be honored to be considered. But I've got a lot of learning to do. I've got the fact that I'm the newly minted councilman I'm still learning the policies and procedures, and still kind of embarrassed when I find out things that you think you should know and somebody asks you a question. So not expert in all areas. And as an engineer, you feel uneasy when you don't have the facts. You feel a lot more confident when you've got some research under your belt and you've got the facts under your belt to pull out when you need it.
Yep.
So,
well, thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down with me. I found it incredibly interesting. I think you bring a lot of ability and research into what you do at the council, and I really appreciate your service and the work that you do.
well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay.